All right, council members, we now have the chair, Councilmember McDuffie, Councilmember Pinto, and Councilmember Fruman present, who are all the members we're anticipating for today's markup. So we're live on YouTube, and I'll get us going on the recording. You can start when you're ready.
Excellent. Good afternoon. I'm Robert White, council member at large and chair of the Committee on Housing. Today is Wednesday, April 26, 2023, and we are meeting virtually on Zoom. The time is now 2:34 p.m. and I'm calling to order this additional meeting of the committee. We have a quorum consisting of myself and council members Kenyon McDuffie at large, Councilmember Matt Fruman, Ward 3, and Councilmember Brooke Pinto from Ward 2. We have two items on today's agenda. First, we will discuss the report and recommendations of the Committee on Housing on the fiscal year 2024 budget for agencies under its purview. After that, we will consider PR25-130, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers, Andrew Sullivan Confirmation Resolution of 2023. All council members and staff should have received copies of the materials for today's markup yesterday morning. My staff circulated an updated version of our budget report this morning, which had one substantive change to identify funding to enhance the Dementia Navigators program at the Department of Aging and Community Living, a shift we made at the request of Councilmember Fruman. I knew before receiving the proposed budget that declining revenues and less federal money meant that we would have to make hard choices this year. There were never going to be any easy answers, and the budgets of the last few years were unsustainable. Still, when I looked through the details of what we received, I was deeply saddened to see a budget that seemed to be balanced on the backs of those who had the least. Budget cuts in this committee were as broad as they were deep. The testimonies we heard consistently at our budget hearings about the harms that we'd see from the level of disinvestment being proposed was heartbreaking. The proposed budget for this committee had almost every program taking losses. In the same budget, there were cuts impacting victims of domestic violence, people with disabilities, transgender and gender nonconforming young adults, tenants, people experiencing homelessness, and people on the brink of homelessness or destabilization. Perhaps the most high profile of the budget reductions was a decision to dramatically reduce funding for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, or ERAP. ERAP is one of our key tools to help residents with incomes below $40,000 facing eviction stay in their homes. The proposed budget for ERAP would have dropped us from $43 million this year, an amount that only got us halfway through the year, to just over $8 million next year. That cut would inevitably result in more people being evicted and more families entering our homeless services system, or at least being displaced. The same budget proposal includes no new vouchers, big cuts to the Department of Human Services, and declining shelter capacity as a result of significant reductions in the budget for shelter rehabilitations. So we were faced with an uphill battle and hard choices in our committee. But we went to work with support from members across the council, and I'm proud of the work that we've accomplished together. The committee has identified funding to strengthen the Office of ANCs, ensuring that they don't breach contracts, and giving them more flexibility to help our ANCs, particularly with websites and technology. We helped save staff whom the Office of Tenant Advocate would have had to let go, and restored funding so they can strengthen their legal representation and outreach to tenants facing eviction. We increased funding for the Emergency Housing Assistance Program for tenants who are forced out of their homes in emergencies, and increased OTA's ability to go after slumlords whose neglect harms our residents. At DHS, we restored funding to support survivors of domestic violence who show up at Virginia Williams looking for help. We reversed a cut to the Interim Disability Assistance Program, and we restored funding for the LGBTQ workforce programs. And with a big boost from Councilmember Nadeau, we were able to invest $1.2 million a year in Project Reconnect to help people stay out of shelter and quickly return to safe and stable housing. As in prior years, we were able to fund new housing vouchers for returning citizens, a resource that gets used quickly to ensure people returning home have options other than a homeless shelter or the street. With the support of Councilmember Bonds, we identified funding to help condos go after developers about poor building conditions. And at the request and with the assistance of Councilmember Parker, we identified targeted resources to address security concerns at Edgewood Terrace. And I'm proud to say the committee, with support from Council members Louis George, Nadeau, Allen, and Henderson, was able to increase the proposed budget for ERAP by 76%, with an infusion of $6.3 million in fiscal year 24. And in the Budget Support Act, we are including Councilmember Louis George's legislation to increase transparency in the program so we can monitor these new investments. It's still not enough, but it's progress we couldn't have made without the partnership of this committee and other members of the council. We were also happy to help fund this council's groundbreaking legislation last year to strengthen civil rights in this city through the Domestic Workers Employment Rights Amendment Act and my Elimination of Discrimination Against Women Amendment Act. And I'm particularly proud that our committee was able to identify funding to send to the Committee of the Whole to fund my Pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees Act. This bill gets to one of the key drivers of many of the problems we are facing: a lack of trained social workers to reinforce our housing, education, and public safety programs. Within this committee, this gap is one of the key reasons our residents experiencing homelessness take so long to get into permanent housing. My legislation, which I drafted with the University of the District of Columbia, will create a pipeline of new social workers coming out of a free UDC program to fill those gaps and give our residents the care and support they need. I also want to acknowledge that the mayor's budget included in the Budget Support Act some innovative ideas to produce and preserve affordable housing. Many of those ideas I have supported in principle for some time. Unfortunately, the legislation sent to us was overall poorly targeted to meet the greatest needs and lacked transparency. We are putting forward versions of those ideas for downtown housing, land purchasing, and housing production trust fund and tax abatements that are more narrowly tailored with a focus on deeper affordability, more public benefits, and greater transparency. I know that the various committees we all sit on came to somewhat different outcomes on these subtitles, but I do want to recognize that many of our staff work together, and I think all of our proposals are stronger for that collaboration. Obviously, we'll need to address the differences between our legislative proposals before the full council finalizes the budget, but I'm confident we can do so because I think we largely share the same goals. Finally, I'm proud of this committee's oversight of the Housing Authority, which is reflected in this report. We are proposing a variety of new reforms that will permanently improve transparency and accountability at DCHA, including financial reporting and leadership training requirements, as well as mandating and funding an annual Act-for-Style comprehensive audit of DCHA's finances by our Inspector General. And our Budget Support Act would subject executive bonuses at DCHA to the same limitations that apply to everyone else in the district government, so we won't see a repeat of executive bonuses that are higher than many residents' annual salaries and not tied to clear metrics. Finally, we incorporated Chairman Mendelson's legislation, which will lower barriers at DCHA for residents to access locally funded vouchers. Obviously, despite these improvements, there's more to do to restore our core safety net programs at the full council, and this is not the end of the conversation about our housing and human services needs this year, but we've come a long way in a short time. Before I open the floor to discussion on the report, I want to acknowledge the members of this committee and your staff, Council members McDuffie, Pinto, Fruman, and Parker. I have appreciated your partnership and communication with me and my team during the budget process over the last few months. Your participation in our work, thoughtful questions in our hearings, and recommendations for our budget have made this report better. I know that we may disagree from time to time on one issue or another, but what I'm struck by is how much we share an interest in strengthening support for our most at-risk residents and ensuring everyone has a safe and affordable place to call home in DC. So thank you. With that, is there any discussion on the report and recommendations of the Committee on Housing for the fiscal year 2024 budget for agencies under its purview?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to your team. I appreciate your statement and your acknowledgement of all the hard work that went into this report. And I want to just similarly acknowledge the collaboration. I think you and your team were really intentional with my team throughout the budget process. I think this committee report includes some really notable funding and initiatives to ensure that the council prioritize the protection of our residents from displacement and neglect in housing. And so I think you've done a good job given the limited resources with identifying, the priorities and trying to protect those things that did not have the same levels of funding in the mayor's proposed budget as they have in the past. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that more people will be in, I think, safe quality housing as a result of the work that's happening within the committee. Restoring losses at the Office of the Tenant Advocate, as you mentioned, is really important. I think specifically, I'm pleased to see that the committee added $6 million to the ERAP program. I know that was something that was widely discussed within the council. I think it was a priority for all the members. I know it was discussed widely in the media and among the advocacy community. And so I'm really pleased to see the work that you all did to identify additional resources to support such a critically important program in our city. I think restoring the cuts to services for survivors of domestic violence within DHS, another really absolutely necessary priority, which you all identified and work really hard to enhance the resources there. Like identifying funding and support pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees Act, which I know something that you've really been working on, you and I have discussed, and I'm proud that supported it as a co-introducer. And so I'm glad to see that the legislation is going to be a part of what you're doing in this report and recommendations to help expand the number of licensed social workers that are going to be able to assist service providers and really help others secure housing that is sorely needed in the city. And I also want to commend you for your continuing long-term support of returning citizens, for the steps your committee is taking to provide additional oversight of the housing authority. And that includes mandating and funding the annual independent audit of the authority. And so I could go on. There's a series of things that I think are reflected in here. I know my colleagues, Councilmembers Pinto, Fruman, and others have really championed certain investments like, as I mentioned, survivors of domestic violence. I know it's been a priority for Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Pinto has championed, emergency and permanent legislation to prevent discrimination when the city determines eligibility of local rent supplement program. And so a lot of work went into this. I think when the public thinks about the sort of tight budget that we're in right now, I think it's, good for them to know and understand the level of collaboration that is taking place down at the Wilson Building amongst the committees and sharing of resources to really elevate the priorities that we know are important to residents, particularly those who are most vulnerable. So I want to just commend you on that and thank my colleagues as well and our respective teams for the collaboration and work that went into this budget. I'm proud to vote for it.
Thank you so much, Councilmember McDuffie. Councilmember Pinto.
Thanks so much, and congratulations, Chairman White, to you and your whole team. I want to echo gratitude to your team for being so, and you for being so collaborative and thoughtful in a very tight budget year, and thinking, I think in a lot of ways, broader than just the housing context for how these agencies that we're working with have a lot of crossover and shared priorities in accomplishing our goals. And so I really appreciate your leadership there. Want to especially thank you for a couple of things. One, I'm really enthusiastic about your inclusion for much of the Recovery Act in the committee report for deeper and more affordability. I think it's great what you've done here in terms of prioritizing downtown recovery, that I know has been something that you've worked on for many years and is really important that we get this right and that we do so now, because it's going to take us years to help downtown recover, and the government won't be able to do it alone. But there are certain investments that we need to make now to make these projects viable and to ensure that we can have more people living downtown, reimagine our downtown spaces, and ensure that families who work downtown can afford to live there, which many can't at the moment. And so I'm really excited about these abatements and the impact that can have on our shared goal to re-envision much of downtown. I'm really grateful for the funds that you put in your bill for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women Act. This is a really important bill that we're going to be continued to focus on in promoting gender equity. And I'm very grateful for your leadership there, as well as funds for domestic violence and survivors, which were faced significant cuts this year. And we know are not only so important to those survivors themselves, but we see so many attenuated consequences of domestic violence over the long term, and other violence that it can face in our community when we don't support survivors in an appropriate way. I really appreciate you finding additional funds for ERAP. I know those cuts are very concerning for so many in the community, and hope that we can continue working with Chairman Mendelson to locate additional dollars for this much needed safety net, to help folks make ends meet and make sure that we're preventing homelessness, that I know is something we all want to see, and appreciate, generally your other focus in this report. There's a lot of great things on here, from vouchers to other homelessness supports. Really appreciate your support, continued support for returning citizens. That's going to be a major focus with us on the Committee on Judiciary, is thinking about how important it is to public safety to support our returning citizens, for their livelihoods and dignity, but also for our public safety goals and challenges. And your continued investments there are making a real difference and are really important, as well as for the domestic workers' rights and making sure that that education piece can be included. So a lot of great stuff in here. Really appreciate it, and want to thank my team as well for all of your work in this budget. But thank you, Chairman White, and thank you for your leadership here. And I look forward to supporting the committee report today.
Thanks so much, Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you, Chairman White, and the Committee on Housing and your great staff for your hard work and support of safe, stable, affordable housing for all residents throughout the budget process. The committee has done aggressive oversight under the chairman's leadership that enabled the budget that connects more of our neighbors to stable housing and other social services that the initial proposed budget from the mayor did not. The status quo of high and still rising housing costs is unsustainable. Coming into this budget process and the council's role in this budget process, I was deeply concerned about a perfect storm, increasing rent, a gutted ERAP program, legal assistance that would cause longtime residents to leave the city and potentially be evicted from their homes. I know, Chairman White, that you shared those concerns, and the committee shared those concerns, and the draft budget report helps in moving the city in a different direction. Even in this difficult year, the committee identified funds that begin to restore support for housing insecure neighbors. The additional $6.3 million for ERAP, improving transparency and addressing the growing eviction crisis. It also boosted the emergency housing assistance program, support for domestic violence survivors, vouchers for returning citizens, and other programming that connects vulnerable residents to stable housing. In addition to direct housing support, the committee restored tenant protections and legal defense funding to improve stability for renters. This includes the new legal representative of the Office of Tenant Advocate, a restored position at its educational institute, and changes to help the office recoup more funds from landlords. The committee also strengthened the interim disability assistance program and added $1.2 million to Project Reconnect to divert residents from shelters. I was heartened that the mayor included a property acquisition fund in her initial proposal as it indicated, the executive's embrace of the concept, which could support housing equity and advance the district's housing goals more nimbly. Chairman White voiced important concerns, as have many of my colleagues, about the specific proposal that should be fully considered. And given the complexity of this, it may well be, Chairman White, that it'll all get sorted out between now and the end of the budget process, but I wouldn't be surprised if this was a thing that was hammered out into the legislative process. There's a number of proposals on the table in this area, and it's really important that we get it right. I want to support this report, and as well as you've crafted it. There's a number of competing ideas out there, and I think whether it's sorted the next couple of weeks or months, important to get it sorted out in a way that works. Revitalizing our downtown is a critical element of the whole district's economic future. As we identify methods to support our downtown, we must be consistent with our values and search for ways to enable a fair recovery for all residents and our business community. I look forward to further review of the proposals that facilitate the downtown revitalization, discussions with colleagues about how best to achieve our goals for a vibrant, livable downtown neighborhood. Just at this meeting, there are folks who have different ideas about what's the best way to get this done. I want to get it done in a way that works and where we all work together. Throughout this budget, the committee prioritized accountability and transparency, most notably at the DC Housing Authority, mandated annual independent audits, additional training, limits on bonuses, and other strategies that will initiate a culture shift at the agency. This is one step in the committee's effort to reform DCHA and ensure it can be a leading public housing agency that ensures sanitary, stable residents. We're to continued oversight throughout the year to confirm significant progress. Chairman White's efforts to work across the committees to identify funding for critical priorities that support vulnerable neighbors and improved health outcomes. His leadership helped restore ERAP funds and add nearly $14.5 million in funds for the Department of Human Services to correct drastic cuts contained in the initial proposal. Importantly, this collaboration also helped to set up a new program for free social work degrees at UDC. Once Chairman White's Pathways to Behavioral Health Degrees Amendment Act of 2023 passes the council, this program will begin to address a critical gap in the city's tools to address many of the issues in front of us, whether they be homelessness, whether they be mental health issues in our schools. This is a really important initiative. I'm proud to be a supporter of it, and I'm really pleased to see it funded in this report. Again, thank you to the Committee on Housing staff and Chairman White for compiling an impressive budget that will lead to meaningful improvements for all neighbors, especially those facing housing insecurity or eviction. The committee report furthers our shared goal of achieving stable, accessible housing for all DC residents, well beyond what was presented in the mayor's proposal, and I will vote to approve the report enthusiastically.
Thank you so much again to my colleagues. I appreciate your collaboration and thoughtfulness. At this time, I move the report and recommendations of the Committee on Housing on the fiscal year 2024 budget with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. We have a unanimous aye vote. And so in the opinion of the chair, this motion passes. We will now turn to our final measure on today's agenda, PR25-130. This bill would reappoint Mr. Andrew Sullivan, a Ward 3 resident and a member of the Board of Real Estate Appraisers for a 3-year term. Chairman Mendelson introduced the appointment resolution at the request of the mayor on February 28th, 2023. Mr. Sullivan's nomination will be deemed approved on May 1st, 2023, Due to the time-sensitive nature of the appointment, the committee could not hold a public roundtable to consider the nomination, but we want to mark up this committee print and report to ensure a public record of our review. The committee sent Mr. Sullivan standard questions to vet his nomination. The committee received timely responses and has reviewed all answers in detail. Mr. Sullivan is being nominated as one of 3 board members who must be real estate appraisers, licensed and in good standing in the district and with not less than 3 years experience. Mr. Sullivan has been serving on the Board of Real Estate Appraisers since 2017 and has appraised thousands of commercial and residential properties in the district. Since 2005, Mr. Sullivan has worked for the district government as a senior appraiser at the District of Columbia Real Property Assessment Division. In this capacity, he has appraised highly complex commercial properties in the district. As a senior appraiser, he has also established annual real estate assessments for over 500 office, hotel, retail, apartment, mixed use, and special purpose properties whose aggregate value exceed $15 billion. Based on our review of his responses to our questions and his experience, we believe that he is qualified to continue in his role and support his reappointment. Is there any discussion on PR25-130? Hearing none, I move the committee print and report for PR25-130, the Board of Real Estate Appraisers, Andrew Sullivan confirmation resolution of 2023 with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Hearing a unanimous aye, this motion passes. Before we close, I want to thank the people who made this work possible. The committee staff, including Committee Director Sean Hilgendorf, Deputy Committee Director Sean Cuddihigh, Legislative Counsel Nia Evering, and Legislative Counsel Caitlin Kochalova did an immense amount of work at all hours of the day and night, 7 days a week. And I want to thank them for just an incredible amount of work and a very strong budget. I also want to thank Jen Budoff, our budget director. Jen's leadership is valuable every year, but this year she provided particular guidance to me and my team on the ins and outs of housing finance, the issues to consider, and places to look. Jen's experience and expertise helps guide the work of the entire council, and we are so much stronger for having her. Joe Wolf, who has been our budget analyst this year. We've worked with Joe for years on our capital budgets, but this year was the first year we had the benefit of his experience as our primary budget analyst. In this new role, my team has become even more appreciative of Joe's creativity, attention to detail, and thoughtful presentation of policy options. Joe has been constantly accessible, calm under pressure, and efficient in his work. We would not have gotten here today without Joe Wolf's work. Ann Phelps, our budget counsel and chief of staff for the budget office. There are people in every institution that help hold the place together. Ann is one of those people for the council. Her experience, honesty, and above all, compassion helps make the council stronger and the experience of working with her better. In our general counsel's office, I'd have to thank Nicole Streeter, our general counsel, whose guidance my team and I call upon regularly, and whose team at the office of the general counsel keeps us all on track. And last but not least, Valerie Nadal, the committee's assistant general counsel, we have had the pleasure of working with for several years, and whose thoughtful review of and focused questions make every piece of legislation we write in our office better. Actually, I also have to thank Jamie Landinen, the fiscal analyst assigned to our committee in the office of the chief financial officer. Jamie this year has been particularly responsive, decisive, and cheerful in his work as always. We appreciate Jamie's partnership. Finally, as we close, if anyone listening wants to learn more about the work of the committee or get involved in our work, please sign up for our newsletter at robertwhiteatlarge.com. With that, the business before this committee is concluded. The time is now 3:02 p.m. and this additional meeting is adjourned. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.